Hola mi gente, MsMalcolmHughes here. Welcome back. Today we're going to do something I feel like we've taken a break from on the channel, but I'm back to it, and that is a book review. Today we will be reviewing The Merciless Ones by Namina Forna, and this is the sequel to The Gilded Ones, which I reviewed last year, which was actually on my top 5 list of books I read in 2021. So definitely check that out. And just to give a quick description, I think of this book like fall. Just like fall can teach us that death can be beautiful, so does The Merciless Ones. So our protagonist, Deka, has to once again shed the person she's known herself to be in order to truly evolve into who she's always been and who she actually is destined to be. So on this journey, we, just like Deka, I'm gonna say Deka. Just like Deka, we question everything that we know about Otera based on what we learned in the Gilded Ones. Everything is arguably turned upside down, and the question becomes, who can we trust? So, like, who are the good folks? Who are the villains? Are there any good folks here? Maybe there are no good people in this story, right? Everyone's actions seem maybe duplicitous. We have to really decipher who's for what's right, but also what's right. Is what you believe to know true actually the truth? And then it becomes a question of, in some situations, life will really put even good people in tough situations and challenging situations where you have limited choices that really stretch you and cause you to make decisions that maybe you wouldn't have given a different opportunity. And so what people believe to know to be holy or be the truth may not actually be true. And that's really the point of this story here. That's the journey that we're going with Deka. Coming off the Gilded Ones, Deka freed the goddesses. And in this story, are the goddesses really the goddesses? Is anything true? Is Deka really the Enduro? Like, what is happening? So we go on this whirlwind journey. And I'm going to go over my notes of like the pros and the cons, and then I'll give my final synopsis of the book. So this book does open with a very alarming scene. It starts off with 4 girls whose heads are on stakes. And so I feel like this really brought home immediately the fact that it's dangerous for women in the world of Otera. And this one and every other one, if we're being honest. But that's really the point that was brought home early on with the opening scene. So we find out that it's 6 months since Deka has freed the goddesses, 6 months since our last book. And things are not better than they were. The freedom that was promised has yet to arrive. I think that's a good premise to base a book off of, right? I think that builds for a lot of suspense, and we do get a lot of suspense in this book. I will say early on, I felt like I received clarity on something that I said based on my review of the last book, and y'all can tell me if I missed it. But I feel like in the first book, The Gilded Ones, and the author never gave us the physical description of White Hands to identify her racially. And I very distinctly remember thinking that White Hands was white. And I remember a watcher said, it's so funny that you identified her as white because I felt like she was Black. And in this book, Namina Forna very clearly identifies her as Black. And when I think about it, I'm just like, why didn't I identify her as Black? And especially because if someone is saying white hands, I just thought she had on gloves. But if someone is saying white hands, obviously that's a distinguishable feature from the rest of your body. So that really took me down this rabbit hole of really questioning my own thoughts, because I'm someone who I feel like has studied a lot of Black history and is pretty knowledgeable in that sense, and has actively worked to dismantle any white supremacist thoughts that I may have inherited just from growing up in America. But even still, you had the most powerful person in the story, or one of the most powerful people in the story, and I still identified them as white. And so that took me down a whole rabbit hole. And that was actually quite appropriate because Deka herself has to question so much of what she has held to be true as well. Even things that she's never considered, she just has held them to be true because that's always been the truth, and things that she's internalized, she really has to break free from that as well. So though it was a little trippy for me mentally first going in, it ended up being so perfect and fitting right in with our protagonist. I'm also curious, did y'all have the same experience? How did you all envision White Hands? I would like to know. I'm actually quite curious about that. Drop that in the comments below. So with that, I would say that like I really enjoyed the suspense of this book, right? We're getting into the prose. I really enjoyed the suspense of this book. What exactly is going on with the goddesses? What exactly is happening with Dougal? It was confusing throughout. Honestly, I kind of felt like I saw the end coming as far as the big reveal in a sense. But even still, it's back and forth. Dika's confused. That's sometimes a little frustrating. But she's young. We have to remember how young they all are, right? They're still teenagers. And so she's confused. She's questioning a lot. And we go on that with her. Also, I love the fact that Namina Forna does so much with playing on religion and like what things we hold holy and sacred and true. And I feel like this book really unpacks that in sometimes a long and drawn out way, but it does unpack it. So I think that religion is always an interesting topic to play on. I would say that another thing about Namina Forna that I appreciate when reading her books is that she does great dialogue, which honestly I think carries the book sometimes when it may be pacing, maybe slow, or sometimes she may be repetitive with telling the same story in different ways. And so it really is the dialogue that carries us through. So I do appreciate that. So let's get into some things that I didn't enjoy as much about the book before I get into my general takeaway. It was a little frustrating for me, and I know that like our main character has to have her own issues, but I was like, why does Dika always have problems with her powers? It's never just straightforward, it's never simple, it's never easy. It's always something, and that is sometimes frustrating. Especially as me, the reader, who's really rooting for her. I'm like, can she catch a break? Apparently not. This isn't necessarily negative, but I feel like I saw a lot of N.K. Jemisin in the first book. Here too, but I feel like I saw bits of J.K. Rowling here as well as far as the world building. And that's not a negative, just it's always interesting to see like which writers seem to influence others' works. And I'm also curious if those are the people that she would name. There were certain scenes that like weren't necessarily for me. I feel like they were a little too esoteric in a sense. So there's a scene between Dika and Ixa where they become one, and everything that happens after that. And that's not impossible to write. It's not impossible to believe because of the connection that they have. It just seemed like it came out of left field a little bit. And I don't feel like she fully explored it for me to feel comfortable with the sense that that actually happened. And there were a few things in the book that I felt like I could see it as movie scenes. And I almost felt like she was writing for that as opposed to carrying the story forward in some places. Sometimes the laments were long, drawn out, unnecessary, or I felt like they were repetitive in the complaints, or just the stories and messaging that she was trying to like hit over our head. For example, like the inner betrayal of women for men. That was something I have in my notes. I was like, we get it. But none of it made me want to stop reading the book. So there's a thing. So I did have in my notes, I felt like initially she was really trying to be ambitious in what she was trying to accomplish with the breaking down and critical or the critique of religion. And at first I was like, I'm not sure if she's doing it successfully. I will say that it all came together in the end, and I am curious to see where the final book in the trilogy will go. So it does all come together, but it's a long journey to it coming together. Almost like the fifth season by N.K. Jemisin, because you're for a long time like, where are we going? What are we doing? And then it all does come together in the end and you feel satisfied. I felt a little less satisfied here, but it does still come together. And my final critique is that I felt like our protagonist, Dika, I felt like her continence, just her fortitude, it felt more flimsy here. She was more reactionary here, I felt like. And I felt like for her to be the leader, that was a flaw. And I felt like she needed to have gotten that under control. But then again, these are still teenagers. So there are scenes where we see them stick their tongues out at each other that really remind us that these are youth making these like life-altering decisions or even world-altering decisions. I did like the build-up at the end to what's coming in the next book. I have in my notes here, I said she basically ends the book with play with me today, then get some sleep. You know it's up tomorrow between Dika and the gods. I wasn't mad at the final decision from Dika. I just felt like there was a lot of back and forth, indecisiveness. But it's also hard to come to the realization that everything that you've held true is not the actual case at all, and who you've known yourself to be is someone different as well. So that's a lot to grapple with. I think she tried to write that and portray that clearly. It didn't always come across as clearly as she probably desired, but I did enjoy the read. At no point did I want to not continue reading the book. I always knew I would finish it. So that's a credit to the writer. So overall, my final take is I enjoyed the book. I'm looking forward to part 3. I'll definitely pick it up when I see it. I saw this book in the bookstore and picked it up immediately. It wasn't even a second thought. So I am enjoying the series. I'm interested to see book 3. I feel like this is kind of like the gap between the two. You have to progress the story, but at the same time, you don't have the final conclusion. It's not the first book where you're really trying to build the world and introduce your readers to these characters. So this one is a tricky one, but I think overall, I think she did a good job. I don't regret reading it, and I would recommend it to others. So my final scale for you, based on read it now, read it when you have time, or read it when you want, I would say read it when you have time. But I would say read it, especially if you enjoyed The Gilded Ones. I think this is a series that I will see all the way through, and I think you all should see it all the way through as well. So that's my review. That's my conclusion. Before we tap out of here, I do definitely want to say RIP to Takeoff. I got the news this morning, first thing when I woke up. It's incredibly sad, and I really wish that we valued life more than we do. And it was just heartbreaking news, man. It's people say we get desensitized, and yes, that's true, but it's also still tragic and it's still sad. And I really, really hope that collectively we as Black people can do the healing and the coming together that we need in order to address the issues that we do to each other within the community, and then what others do to us outside of the community. That's it for me. As always, I am MsMalcolmHughes, and until the next one, please remember to give time, to be kind to each other, and to have the best day of your life on purpose. Adios.